Light on, what's exciting in Brighton? And who's doing inspiring things in Manchester and Sheffield? All will be revealed. Light on, a journey of discovery through Bristol, Hull and Coventry. What's cool in Liverpool, you'll see. Scintillating cities and stunning countryside. Strap in and enjoy the ride. Light on, with Hazel as your guide. Light on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Light on, with Hazel as your guide. Light on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Light on, with Hazel as your guide. Light on.
My name is hazelmillichamp and this is an episode of Light On, where I spread my searching light a little further than Leeds. This week, that light falls on Dorset and the writer-creator Caleb Ranson. Caleb has written and created some of the biggest successes on UK TV in recent years. He wrote and co-created the 8-part TV adaptation of Around the World in 80 Days, starring David Tennant, which I loved. I've been looking forward to speaking to Caleb for such a long time, and we had a fantastic rambling conversation that I'm sure you'll thoroughly enjoy. Have a listen. On this episode of the Light On series, I have Caleb Ranson come to speak to me. Hello, Caleb.
Hello there.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's a beautiful sunny day today, so thank you for staying inside and speaking to me.
That's okay, my pleasure.
So, Caleb, you are a writer. You've written lots of things that people will have seen, and I came across your work really when my son was in a pilot that you wrote called Mrs. In-Betweenie. Can you tell me a little bit about that production?
I mean, that was something that was sort of very close to my heart in a way. We filmed that and it went out in 2008 on BBC Three, and that was with Paul Abbott's production company. Paul Abbott, you might know as a very famous sort of writer-producer. He did Shameless, State of Play, No Offence, and Wolf recently. Yeah. And it was originally his idea, and he sort of he was my mentor when I started out writing 20 years ago.
Ah, right.
So he sort of brought me on board, and then we developed it together, and we made this pilot, which went out. I think there was about 5 other pilots that went out on BBC Three, and 2 of them were going to go to series, and one of them did go to series, which was Being Human, I think it was.
Yeah, that's right.
And the premise of it was, I guess it was kind of ahead of its time in a way, which was it was a sort of black comedy drama, and it was about 3 kids, teenagers, whose parents die, and their long lost uncle comes back to look for them, and their uncle is now has had a sex change, was in the middle of a sex change, and she comes back to look after them, and she was played by Amelia Bullmore, the actress, and I mean, it was fantastic. It was such a joy to work on, and it was an hour. And we were, I think if you were making it now, obviously you'd cast accordingly. I don't think you could do, There were certain things we wouldn't do now, though, of course we did then. But our heart was in the right place. And it was just an absolute joy to work on. I think you can probably track it down somewhere online. And it is really worth watching, because I think Amelia's performance especially is just fantastic. And Craig Parkinson was in it, who's, of course... a big podcast star in his own right now, and of course, he's absolutely incredible actor. I mean, right across the board, the kids were fantastic. It was just a fantastic production, and it was one of the few occasions. Usually, I can sort of shrug these things off, but we worked so hard on it, and we so wanted it to go to series, and it never did. And it was a bizarre situation because obviously, Being Human got commissioned, quite rightly, and it was a bit of a competition. So out of these 6 pilots, whoever got the highest ratings theoretically should go to series when they were broadcast. And Being Human and Us, we got the highest ratings. We got about the same ratings.
Right, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but we didn't go to series because we got the wrong demographic, because it was for BBC Three. So we got lots of mums and dads watching, which they didn't want at the time. They just
Oh,
wanted young people. So it was a very bizarre situation. So we were too successful in a way. And then we tried to get it away on BBC Two, but they wouldn't do it. Lots of politics was going on at the BBC. But it's one of those. It was one of those sort of missed opportunities. I think we had a whole series planned, and it would have been great. And but for whatever reason, it didn't happen. But it was absolute joy to work on.
yeah, and you can actually still see it. I think you can see it on YouTube.
Yes, I think
Yeah,
it's there.
it was fantastic, and I know that my son Jay really enjoyed being involved in it. He got to wear lots of crazy dog costumes, I seem to remember.
Yes. Actually his character was based on somebody I knew.
Oh, really?
And their kid who is I won't tell you their name because they're in their 20s now probably.
Yeah.
And but every time we used to see them, she was always dressed in a different dog costume. And she actually wanted to be a dog, and she'd go around and lick you and stuff. So it was she doesn't do that anymore, obviously. She's a very well-rounded adult now. But so that was I mean that was kind of the tone. You kind of summed up the tone of the piece there. But it was lovely to work on something that was really sort of heartfelt, and I mean it'd be fantastic to bring that back now. It'd be very complicated, I think, in terms of rights and everything. But it was a real missed opportunity. And as I say, it was you do things so much differently now than you would do then, even though that was only 14 years ago. But it was an absolute joy.
Yeah, it was brilliant. I know what you mean about that. Times just seem to have moved quickly, and there's so many things now that you watch on TV that you only watched a few years ago that have sort of problematic elements about them.
Yeah.
It's a strange old world, but I think there's something about, I mean, I don't know what you think, but I worry about there's kind of a balance, isn't there, between sort of stopping anyone seeing those old things, because you need to sort of be able to think about why those things are slightly more jarring these days. I worry about everything just getting wiped out and we forget what the problem ever was.
No, I completely agree, and it's I don't think those sort of programs, you shouldn't wipe them out and you shouldn't censor them. You should put a disclaimer possibly on the front of them, like a lot of older movies and TV shows are happening now. But I don't think you should censor them. I think you kind of need to see where we've come from and where we are now, and we're in a really good place now, and it's and things have moved on for all the right reasons, I think. But I think you need to know the history of film, and I play some really old films to my kids, and they're horrified about the attitudes. But I still love them. I can't help but love, for example, a film like The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. I mean, I remember seeing that for the first time when I must have been 12, and it was 9:25 on a Monday on BBC One. They always had a film after the news. And I literally couldn't sleep. And we didn't have a video recorder. I couldn't sleep afterwards. I was so excited. I thought it was the most romantic film I'd ever seen. And it's still one of my favorites. But, but you look at it now through an adult's eyes, and you see it's very troubling. I mean, he's essentially a stalker. It's a film about a stalker. And, and when I played it to my kids, they're sort of horrified, but it's, but you can't help, those are the sort of films that sort of mold you as you grow up, and, be it film or music or whatever. And you as long as you acknowledge, I think, what is troubling about those things. And
exactly. I think it's interesting to have the conversations, especially with younger people. I remember watching the kids on Gogglebox watching Grease, which was always, I mean, me and we had 3 copies of the Grease album in our house because me and my sisters couldn't share it. And I was watching the kids on Gogglebox watch that, and they were horrified. They're like, all right, so basically, if you want to get a boy, you've got to start smoking and change the way that you look.
Yeah, and it's incredibly sexual, that film.
It really is.
And I remember when it came out, and was it 78? Wouldn't it have been? So I would have been 10.
Mm-hmm.
And all those songs, all the clips from it, it was promoted as a kids' film, and all the clips from it were on Clapperboard or Screen Test or whatever at the time. And and then you look at it now and you go, oh my God, it's all about sex. And, all the songs are as well, and the dance moves. It's, And you just wouldn't do that now. I mean, I did the same thing with our kids. We played in that, and they were just completely horrified.
Yeah. Luckily so, it's great.
Yes.
It's great that they can see it where we couldn't see it. Can I ask you, Caleb, how did you get started writing in the first place?
Well, I always, right from the age of probably about 5 or 6, I became obsessed by films. And so I've always been completely obsessed by films, and I always wanted to make films. And I thought I really wanted to direct films. And but when growing up, then in sort of 80s, there was no way to do that unless you went to National Film School. There was no media courses around the country. There was no film courses. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. And I didn't know how to get in the industry. So I just sort of knew that's what I wanted to do, and just sort of bumbled my way from one dead end job to the next, really. And all the way I was sort of writing little short films or trying to write scripts, and I bought, there's a film called Time Bandits, which is one of Terry Gilliam's films. And I remember buying the script of that because I didn't even know how you wrote a script. And I bought the script from a bookshop in Manchester. And it became my favorite book. And I couldn't believe that's how you wrote a script. So I sort of learned script writing from that, how you set it out and, interior, exterior, all that sort of stuff. And then I just sort of bumbled my way through life for the next 10 years I left school at 16, and a lot of my friends were getting into the music then in Manchester, which Manchester in the sort of late 80s was sort of the center of the world for music in terms of everything that was coming out of there, And so they were getting into music and getting jobs at recording studios like Strawberry and things. And I ended up making a few sort of music videos for sort of obscure bands that don't exist anymore. And at the same time, I got a job in a local theatre in Manchester called Contact Theatre. This is a very long-winded explanation. And I was an usher, and I eventually worked in the box office. And I had this script in my sort of bottom drawer. It's the only script I'd finished. It was called Children of the Flag, and it was about... it's kind of inspired by Empire of the Sun and David Lean's movies and The Railway Children, which is bizarre. But all my sort of influences. And it was about the German occupation of the Channel Islands seen through a kid's eyes. And I thought it was rubbish, and it was the only script I'd ever finished. But bizarrely at the time, Paul Abbott was working there. He was a sort of writer in residence there, and he was writing on Coronation Street. And a friend of a friend sent him this script, and I didn't realize that he just left Coronation Street as a writer, and he kind of started up his own production company. And he rang me and he said he really loved it, and he bought it. And on the back of that, he got me helped get my agent, who's still my agent, 20 odd years later, in London. And it was the first time I'd ever been to London by myself on the train. I was in my sort of late 20s then. And it's all sort of steamrolled from there, really. So it's purely being in the right place at the right time, and sort of just bumbling around. So that's and I ended up, and the only reason, and I still wanted to be a director, but the only reason I sort of read somewhere that to be a director you needed to know how to write scripts, so that's why I was writing scripts. And then sort of Paul sat me down one day and said, look, you can be a director if you want to, but the thing about directors is they can only work on one thing at a time. If you're directing a film, then you're kind of devoting 2 years of your life to that. Yeah. Whereas if you're a writer, you can work on, if you train yourself, you can work on 6 or 7 things at a time. So you've got a steady income coming in from treatments, from scripts, from all sorts of things, and you can actually make a living out of it. And so
that's good advice.
Yeah, so I sort of followed that advice, and I still do that, to this day. I mean, I work on 7 or 8 things at the same time, in various stages, because ultimately it's my job. I'm in a very privileged position. It's my hobby and my job, but it's what pays my mortgage and feeds my kids. So, yeah, so I was really lucky. So I never got to direct, which I'm perfectly happy about, to be honest with you.
Right, so it's not something you're ever going to think about doing in the future?
I don't know, maybe when the kids have left home or something, but I'm quite happy um, sort of sitting in my office and just writing from home. I love writing from home, and especially since I became a dad. It's many years ago. It's just the ideal sort of scenario, really. I'm
Of
I'm
course, yeah.
I'm happy not even to get on a plane and go anywhere. I'm just happy to be in my own little world, and I can I explore it through my writing and stuff. So
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So, Caleb, the thing that people will have seen most recently, I imagine, in the UK, was the series at Christmas on the BBC, which was amazing. And I have to pass on that my mother, Stella Dixon, loved that series, and she wants you to particularly know that. Was it 80 Days Around the World with Around the World in 80 Days, starring David Tennant, and it was. I just want to say congratulations. I
thank
thought
you.
it was the perfect Christmas fair that you have on the BBC. I loved it. How did you get involved? How did you get started with that?
Well, that was if we go back about 7 years, there was the producer on that, a lovely guy called Simon Crawford Collins. He just started up his own production company called Slim in London, and he sort of contacted me via my agent and just said, we sort of known each other from years before, and we just had a sort of general meeting because we wanted to work with each other. And he had some ideas, and I had some ideas. And he had a couple of ideas. I can't remember what the other books were, but we were looking at books that were out of copyright for a start, nice and cheap, which is ironic considering what happened to this show. But anyway, so we looked at Around the World in 80 Days, and I immediately just said, yes, this is the one. But mainly because of my I absolutely adored the film. I'm a huge fan of the actor David Niven, and as a kid, I absolutely adored the film version of Around the World in 80 Days when he was Fogg in it. And it's one of those films that I used to watch with my dad, and my dad had died many years before, and so it was a bit of a homage to him as well, sort of my dad and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't an obvious one to do as a TV series, but we both thought. So I went away and I wrote a couple of pages on how I sort of visualized this and how we could update it. And I read the book for the first time, and the book's good, but it's very lacking in character. It's and also it's a bit of a it's about the British Empire, really,
Yeah.
and it's a satire. So for example, when he sets off on his journey, the next time you see him, I think he's in Sudan or something. So they miss out Europe completely because there's no point going there. So which is a godsend. And so it was kind of reassuring in a way because you knew that there was so much there you could elaborate on and keep the spirit of the book, but you could create something really quite magical, I think. So then it was just it's a relatively simple process to convince people to sort of finance a script. But then it got quite difficult because we suddenly realized that, we're dealing with a period drama set in the 1800s. And usually in a drama, you'd have certain sets that you would go back to a precinct, be it a police station or hospital or something. But the nature of this show was that every episode was a different country. So it's going to be really, really expensive. And it turned out to be very expensive, but I think sort of well worth it. So it was, and then it was about 6 years until it sort of hit the screen. And
wow, really? 6 years?
Yeah. And I sort of did the first couple of scripts, and then Ashley Pharoah came on board. Thank goodness, who's just an absolute genius. And then we carried on developing it together. And it was incredibly sort of complicated production. And of course, we started shooting in March a couple of years ago in South Africa. And about 3 weeks into the shoot, we had to stop because of COVID, because that had just hit the world. So then it was put on hold then for 8 months, something like that. Then we could start shooting again. So it was, it was an absolute joy, I have to say, to work on it. And the cast we had was just amazing. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, definitely. I read the book a couple of weeks ago. just to sort of to have something to sort of compare. And I totally agree with you that it's not as Phileas Fogg is not a particularly. I love the way that you portrayed him. So he starts off as this sort of stiff upper lip sort of person, and he doesn't seem to have much kind of emotion about him. And I love the way that unfolds. I love the way that because Fix in the book is obviously completely different.
Yeah.
I thought it was wonderful, and I think as well. I think one of the things that made it so great was the idea that during COVID, most of us have not been able to travel as we would have liked to have done, and so it felt like a really lovely chance to sort of be with the characters and see all those amazing locations.
Yeah, and that's purely by chance. That's, again, it's one of those things. It would have been interesting to see how it would have been received if there wasn't a pandemic in the world, and that's purely by chance that that was the case. Because when we started out, it wasn't quite obvious why it was relevant to now. And of course, then Brexit happened, and suddenly it became quite obvious, because it became a show about Europe, about how, despite all our differences, we are all the same as human beings. And wherever you go in the world, there are more, there's less differences, and we're more the same than you realise.
Yeah.
So that suddenly became, it suddenly made the show very relevant. And in terms of a character like Fix, I mean, that was an absolute delight. Right from the start, we wanted to, make her a woman, and I wanted to. I sort of based her on an actual person called Nellie Bly, who was the first sort of female journalist in the 1800s. And if your listeners ever want to go and read about it, it's an absolutely amazing story. In fact, she wrote a book a couple of years after Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days came out, and she called it Around the World in 72 Days because she actually did the trip to prove to prove she could do it better. And I actually wanted to do that book originally, but there's no way at the time that anybody would do that, So we, sort of, because it's not a huge sort of book like Around the World in 80 Days is. But we sort of smuggled her character into 80 Days, via Fix. So she's she's in there.
Yeah, she's a great character. I really loved her. And as a writer, do you get to go to the locations where things have been filmed, or does that sort of depend?
No, I mean, it's kind of, I'm sort of in a sort of lucky position, really, that a lot of the stuff I do, I sort of exec produce, or if not, I'm involved sort of right across the board in, from casting, choosing director all the way across. I mean, in this case, it was slightly different because of COVID. It was a sort of bizarre couple of years, in that I had sort of 3 productions sort of filming around the world, but I didn't visit any of them. So it felt a bit, you felt a bit isolated in a way from the process. But yeah, usually I can sort of, although, having said that, I've learned over the years, it's lovely to visit, but nobody really wants you there because everybody's very polite to you. Actors especially are very, very lovely to you, in case you could write them some more lines or something. But there's not a lot for you to do, and the producers usually have to justify you being there. So I remember being flown out. I did a series called Daylight Robbery years and years ago with Michelle Collins, and they did a sequel which they wanted to start it off in Florida. And the production company sent me out to Florida, sent me out to Miami for a week to write the script. And of course, in principle, that sounds fantastic, but it just meant I was stuck in a hotel writing a script. So it was, it's lovely to go out, but a lot of times you just end up seeing the 4 walls of a hotel bedroom.
Do you ever write anything with an idea to perhaps getting to visit somewhere you've not been before?
No, not really. I mean, I'm a terrible traveler as well, I have to say. And it's, I think like a lot of writers, I'm quite antisocial, and I don't have many social skills. Thank God my wife does. But I mean, traveling, I think one of the reasons I write is that I can have all these great, I can travel in my dreams, in my writing.
Yeah,
because I'm I'm quite an anxious traveler. I'm okay once I'm there in places, but yeah. So it's and also I think a lot of the stuff I do or have done recently has been sort of historical as well, which is great. To really sort of um, submerge yourself in a different period in time. As it's a great thing to do. Such a sort of privilege to have this job, really.
Yeah, definitely. And can I ask you a little bit about? I don't know how I missed this, but when I was doing some research, I came across the series, the young James Herriot. I can't tell you how much I love James Herriot. I've just finished reading all of the books. I'll watch any of the TV series. I don't mind if it's. I like the old one. I like the new one. I'll watch anything. But I couldn't believe that I ever missed that series. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved with that?
Yeah, I mean that was in around about 2011, I think, and it was on over one Christmas. So a couple of years before, so in about 2008, 2009, I was approached by a producer who had this idea to do James Herriot's life, but when he was a student in Glasgow. Um, and it sounded absolutely fantastic. And I absolutely adored All Creatures Great and Small, the
Yeah.
original series. Again, I've got a belief that I do virtually every job I do because of my dad. Because I want to please him, even though he's been dead for decades.
Oh,
And again, this was probably one of those jobs because All Creatures Great and Small, I used to watch that, with my dad, and it was one of those programs, that we'd watch together. I wasn't much into Doctor Who, but I was really into series like All Creatures Great and Small. So a chance to do this was kind of, I was kind of doing it for my dad in a way.
yeah.
And the writer whose original idea it was, John Byrne, he was dying of cancer, and he was one of the original writers on All Creatures Great and Small, and he wanted to sort of get this series made and sort of pass on the baton, if you like. And I'd written a series called Distant Shores a couple of years before with Peter Davison, which was on ITV, which had a sort of similar tone in a way. And he sort of saw that and he really liked it, and he sort of gave me approval to come on board and develop this series. And then of course I had to go and meet the Herriot family, and that was the best bit of the whole process. I sort of spent a week with them,
Oh, wow.
and because they were very protective about the legacy of their dad, and and that was absolutely wonderful. And then we got into writing this sort of 3-part. It's supposed to be a 3-part pilot, so 3 hours, and it's a really great premise as well. I thought, really sort of going back into, because what was wonderful about it was about university in the 1920s in Glasgow. So already it was about class, but also it was about, it had the legacy of obviously of All Creatures Great and Small. So with lots of animal stories, but also it's about young people at university. So even though it was a period drama in the 1920s, anybody could kind of relate to it because everybody's fallen in love for the first time, all that sort of stuff. So it was great. And then and then it's sort of turned into something else, which I mean, it's very good. I think it's on video if you get a chance to see it. But there was a lot of politics behind the scenes on it, and it wasn't quite what I hoped it would be. But that's just par for the course, really.
Yeah, what a shame. I'll definitely try and get my hands on that. And have you just finished this? It's just finished running in America on NBC. Ordinary Joe.
Yeah, I mean this is a good sort of example of good ideas never die. Really, you should never give up on a good idea, which I never will. Ordinary Joe came about 16 years ago when ITV asked me if I had anything, any ideas to develop. And I came up with this idea, which was it's a bit like sliding doors. It was about a guy who you meet him on the first day, the last day of university, and you see very briefly those sort of people in his life as he's graduating. His friends, and then you cut to 10 years later and you see the 3 different directions his life could have gone. So there's 3 different realities and they all inform each other. So in one he's a cop, in one he's a nurse, and the other he's a pop star. And you see how those lives and are the same but also different. And in one, he's married to his childhood sweetheart, and in another, he's having an affair with her and married to somebody else. So, but ITV ultimately didn't want to do it because I think it was just a bit too tricksy at the time.
Right.
And a up and coming sort of American director, producer called Matt Reeves, who was one of J.J. Abraham's sort of best buddies at the time, and they developed a series called Felicity. This is about 16 years ago. He bought the rights to it, and then every so often he would try and get it made. And a couple of times it got developed in the States with American writers. And then as his directing career really took off, he did the Planet of the Apes movies. He's just done the Batman.
Wow.
So about 2 years ago, they did a pilot on NBC, and then it got picked up. And it's just finished. It's just finished its first season run in the States on NBC. And I've seen. I mean, it's great. Hopefully it'll come over here at some point to the UK. But they've done a absolutely amazing job. I was just sort of the creator, but so I can't claim to have been on set or anything. But it's but again, it's sort of never give up on a good idea. I mean, that idea was 16 years old.
That's amazing. How do you feel about the whole sort of streaming TV world that we're in now? Do you feel that because from my point of view as just a viewer who absolutely loves TV and film, I feel like the quality of the things that you watch, I mean, there's a lot of it, so there's also a lot of crap, but occasionally things that I just feel like in the past it always seemed to be that films were sort of seen as the highest art form rather than sort of TV series, whereas I kind of feel like that's switched a little bit, or that the prestige of good TV series has really increased.
You're absolutely right. I think we're in a golden age, an absolute golden age. And I think, again, going back to Ordinary Joe, it was 16 years ago. I think we were ahead of the ahead of our time because it was too tricksy. We're very sort of 16 years ago. We had 4 channels, and we were very sort of parochial about what we were making. And a lot of stuff we couldn't necessarily sell around the world, and TV was seen as a sort of sort of the bad brother or bad sister to film, but it's not like that now. Now you can have these big ideas like Ordinary Joe, and there are places to get them made. I was quite surprised actually that NBC picked it up because it felt very tricksy for a mainstream broadcaster in the States. I would have thought it'd be better on a streamer, but I think that's a knock-on effect of streamers. I mean, there's so much, and the way you tell stories as well. You look at Squid Games or something like that. There's a way to tell stories which isn't your traditional Robert McKee. You must have 4 acts, etc., etc. And it's really blown that out the water. And the audiences are there. Going back to Squid Games, massive all around the world. It's a Korean. Who'd have thought it? And that's fantastic. It's breaking down barriers, and to tell these stories in a unique way and these big ideas. It's, for me as a writer, it's sort of godsend because it's the sort of stuff I've always wanted to do, and I sort of wasn't allowed to do that. In the 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah, and it must be just great because you've just got. There just seems to be I think the competition, as a person who's consuming, can be annoying because I have to have so many different, I've got Netflix, I've got Disney Plus, I've got Amazon Prime, because I want to watch everything, and there's so much stuff on all of them. So to some extent, it's annoying that there's not one place that I can go to, but I suppose for quality and for the people who are writing, it gives them a much bigger scope of people that can sell their work to.
It does. I mean, but I think there is you sort of hit the the nail on the head there about the problem with it is that there is so much that you could spend a couple of years really writing your heart out and making something, and unless it's noticed, it could just get lost in the whole the whole streaming sort of process, because there is so much out there. So that is a difficulty.
Yeah, definitely, because I was reading something the other day, and I'd never thought of this, but it was kind of like hints and tips to get over what it is that Netflix recommends you, because it was saying that, it can sort of put you into such a little box that you don't get offered things that you might really like that are on there, but are like hidden away.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other problem is older series and older films. I mean, there's so much positive stuff about streamers and what's going on at the moment, but one of my kids went to college and did a media course in film recently, and they didn't teach them anything before 1980. I think they started with like The Shining. So that whole film heritage, the history of film, it doesn't seem to be there, and it's certainly not there or represented so much on the streamers. They'll only, so if you wanted to watch some obscure, black and white movie, chances are you won't be able to. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, and you might remember this, the BBC used to play all Harold Lloyd films, these sort of silent,
that's right, yeah.
And I don't know where you'd watch them now. I don't know where you get access to that, or Buster Keaton. I mean, I was so obsessed with films. I used to spend, so I'd spend like a month. Right, I'm just going to watch Buster Keaton films. I'm just going to watch Charlie Chaplin films, or whatever. So I really sort of went out my way, because I was so fascinated by all of that. And I was watching some Buster Keaton films recently, and they're just so modern and so amazing, and the timing is incredible. But I worry that those sort of films, the generations that are coming up, where do you find those? Where do you watch those? Unless you know they're there and you actively seek them out,
Yeah, and then the thing is, if nobody ever tells you about them, nobody in your family's ever seen them, then you're unlikely to go seeking them. But I know what you mean. I used to really love watching I Love Lucy on Channel 4. There was a period on Channel 4 when that would be on, and I think it was probably for them to sort of fill a gap. But for me, it was wonderful. And I just recently watched the film about the whole Lucy episode with the terrible communist thing that was going on in America. And I just think what a shame that there'll be people who watch that film who will have no knowledge of, because where do you see that TV series?
No, exactly. I think that's, and it's like we were saying earlier in the podcast about, series that are problematic as well, growing up, and I was absolutely obsessed by the Carry On films, and and I still like them, and I recognize why they're very, very problematic. But it's my kids find them really funny, if troubling, but there is an innocence about them, and there's I don't know, it just, and unless they used to be on all the time, and maybe rightly they shouldn't be anymore, but it'd be a shame for those things to just vanish, as long as you watch them with the right eyes, and a lot of black and white movies, a lot of movies from the, my favorite filmmakers of all time are Powell and Pressburger, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, and they made The Red Shoes, A Matter of Life and Death, I Know Where I'm Going. They're a huge influence on Martin Scorsese. But not many people have heard of them now, and yet you go back and look at their films, and they're just way ahead of their time. From the 1940s and 30s, just incredible filmmaking, and really exciting. To watch those movies as well. Even someone huge like Alfred Hitchcock. The younger generations now don't really know who he is anymore. And time goes on, and that's fine. But it's a shame if we don't have access to all of that, really. And I do worry that the streamers are just following the money.
Yeah, I think one of the things is, when I was younger, we used to go to my grandparents' house every Sunday, and after Sunday lunch, it would always be sort of the old Hollywood movies, which are kind of problematic, but I'm still obsessed with them. And it's kind of like, watching TV has become such a kind of like a personalised experience, that perhaps part of it is because you're not watching things together. So, in those days, I'm sure there was a time when I was like, oh, I really don't want to watch another Hollywood, although I don't think there was, to be fair. But I could have felt like that, and it would have been tough because I was at my grandparents' house and we were watching what they wanted to watch.
Exactly. Yeah. And it is because everybody's in their bubbles and you're being recommended what to watch because of something you've watched before. So you don't tend to step out of those bubbles. I mean, my mum was obsessed by Fred Astaire. So I became obsessed by Fred Astaire.
Yeah.
Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies. I mean, I was watching one the other day, Swing Time, and it's just a work of art. It's just beautiful to watch them dance.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful thing, as like a great book or a painting. It's just it's wonderful. But I wouldn't have if it wasn't for my mum or my dad's obsession with war films, I wouldn't have I wouldn't have seen any of this. So it's being open to all these things, and I do worry that a lot of kids now are just in these bubbles because they're being manipulated by the streamers, because of the stuff they watched before.
Yeah. But then I also sometimes worry, I try and check myself that I just don't want to become like a groaning old person.
I know.
Who thinks modern's rubbish. I don't want to become that.
No, absolutely. I agree. I completely agree.
And so you actually have a film production company called Play Nice Productions. How did that come about, and what's that like?
Well, it's kind of a it's a very sort of small, sort of boutique little production company, really. And I'm a terrible businessman. I am I'm more of a cheerleader, more of a fan, for stuff. So if I do anything through that production company, I'll usually have to team up with somebody else. We did something recently called The More You Ignore Me, which Jo Brand wrote, which is based on her novel. And that was a film starring Sheridan Smith, and that was fantastic. It was very sort of low budget. It was really hard to get on the screen. Genesius Pictures came on board, and they did all the legwork, really. The wonderful Debbie Gray there, the producer. It's all down to her that it got made. But I was in that process. I was more involved in the script and helping Jo realize what she wanted to write, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do something like Play Nice. Is I wanted to make things that I wouldn't be writing, but I would want to watch.
Yeah.
And that was such a joy to be, not writing something, but helping Jo realize, her vision of what she wanted to bring to the screen. And that was such a joy. And it was one of those that we could have given up on it many, many times. It was originally developed by the BBC years and years ago. And then they sort of put it into turnaround and sort of gave up on it, and everybody thought it was dead. And I sort of, every meeting I went to for the next 2 years, I'd say, what about this? This is great. Have you thought about this? And luckily, Debbie Gray at Genesius also thought that. So yeah, as I say, if it's a good idea, I will never give up on it.
And how do people come to you with ideas as part of your production company, or are you looking out for things, or, how does it work?
I don't actively sort of, look for anything, really. I'm sort of I'm sort of just bumbling through it all, really. It's just by sort of chance. There's a couple of, if I read, there was a couple of books I've read recently, or I say recently, the last few years, which I've sort of bought the rights to. And there's a couple of other things I'm talking to some writers about, some ideas they've come up with. So yeah, it's just, as I say, it's a very small, it's just me, really.
Oh, well, nice to hear about how it all works. And so you also had a series recently, I'm not sure if it's out now or not, on HBO called Bring Back Alice. What was that about?
Well, that's just finished shooting, actually, and that was a strange one. That happened the first week of lockdown. I had a phone call from a friend of mine who runs HBO Europe. So he's responsible for all the drama in Eastern Europe. And he had this idea by these Polish writers, but they needed it got so far, but they wanted it to be sort of more developed. And I sort of came on board to help develop it, and I ended up writing it all. And it's a kind of odd process. It was I suppose the closest thing it would be to something like Riverdale or something like that.
Right, yeah.
So it's a sort of teenage series, about sex and murder and drugs, and all set in Warsaw and Gdansk. And so it was a really exciting way to work. So I'd write the scripts, and then they translate them into Polish, and then they translate them back into English to make sure that they were hitting all the right nuances and everything. And they filmed it all. It was a 6-part series. They filmed it all sort of late last year, and hopefully it'll be on sort of Christmas time, I think.
Excellent.
And as I say, it'll all be in Polish, but but hopefully it'll be on over here, possibly on Channel 4 or something like that. But we're just working on the sequel at the moment as well. So
how exciting! Well, I think the thing with foreign language films now, and I kind of, I mean, as far as in my sort of sphere, it kind of felt like it sort of started with Parasite. So
yeah.
because it won the Oscar and it had huge accolades. I've actually found it much easier, and because of the whole Korean TV series and also My Beautiful Friend, I much prefer to watch it in the original language and read the subtitles, because I think for me personally, I know everybody's different, but for me personally, I love this. I feel like I want to hear what the actors are saying, what the voices sound like, and I think there's something about the sound of the language that kind of adds to your viewing pleasure to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right, and I think the tolerance for that is a lot better than it used to be. My kids, for example, they'll watch all sorts of they're just interested in the characters and the story, and it's less about is it going to have subtitles or where it's from. If they can sort of engage in the narrative, that's kind of all they're bothered about. And also they're from a generation where they're sort of video games, so they can take in so much narrative information very quickly, which is great as well. So I completely agree.
So can you tell me a little bit about anything that you've got sort of coming up? Are there any projects that you're working on that we should be looking out for?
Well, there's a series, the thing I'm doing at the moment, which we're sort of developing with I'm developing with a sort of UK production company called Ruby Rock Pictures. It's something called Miss Hardy, which is a potential sort of 8-part series. It's all set in the 1960s in America, and it's I can't really say too much about it, but it's we always sell it as sort of, it's Breakfast at Tiffany's meets Nikita. So so it's quite violent, but it's all about spies and assassins, etc. in the 1960s. So hopefully it'll look fantastic. So we've got it's very early days, but we're talking to Kelsey Grammer from Frasier, and Kate Mulgrew from Star Trek, and Leighton Meester from Gossip Girl. We're sort of in the early stages of talking to them, but we'll see.
Very exciting indeed. So you're based at the moment in Dorset. Have you always lived in Dorset, or is that just where you've sort of ended up with your family?
No, we moved here about 10 years ago. So I sort of, all my life, I sort of lived in Manchester.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So we moved here about 10 years ago. So we're about 10 minutes from the coast. We sort of moved here with the kids and wanted to sort of give them more of a sort of famous 5 sort of life. Which of course,
why not?
And they're really bored of the beach. They don't want to go there anymore. They just want to sit in their rooms and play Xbox. So
you could have lived anywhere, really.
Yeah.
Well, I always ask guests 3 questions about the place where they live in. The first one being, what would you say is great about Dorset?
Oh my God, the seaside, the sky. It's just, certainly for my mental health, it's fantastic. It's just incredible. I mean, coming from Manchester, where you never saw the seasons change, really.
Yeah.
You never noticed them, that sort of eternal grey, which I've got a lot of affection for. But when you go to somewhere like Dorset, where we live now, you really can see the changes in the seasons, and you really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, you're selling it really well. But now I'm going to ask you, if you had to say something that was not so great about Dorset, what would that be?
Probably the fact it's mostly Tory.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's a good one.
In fact, it's probably entirely Tory, I think. But
wow.
which is unfortunate.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. And if somebody had lived in Dorset for a very long time, would you be able to tell them about something that you would consider to be a hidden gem, but they might never have heard of it?
Oh, I've been racking my brains about this. We're sort of big on food, so and we're sort of down here. It's fantastic. So you got things like River Cottage and although there's been a real sort of revolution in food, especially down in Dorset. There's a fantastic restaurant in Bridport called Dorset, Dorshi, and that would be my little recommendation. It's amazing. It does these most amazing Chinese dumplings. It's an incredible
I
experience.
love Chinese. Jiaozi. I'm big on my jiaozi.
Oh yeah.
That sounds great. So if I ever come down, I'll definitely be visiting there. And what will you be doing with the rest of your day today, Caleb?
Well, I might go on a bike ride. I've got a load of work to do. So usually when I've got a load of work to do, I'll be doing something else, sort of work displacement. And they've got a friend down the road who said he wants to go swimming, so I'm not too sure.
Oh, well, it sounds like a nice, healthy distraction from writing, which
I don't know about
that. Do. Thank you so much for joining me today and telling about everything. And I'll put lots of links in the podcast notes to the various things you've done, and we'll look out for all of the great things that you've got coming.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you. What an interested and creative person Caleb is. I'm so looking forward to his new projects, and I will be desperately seeking Young James Herriot until I get my hands on a copy. Caleb chose to feature a track from a local Dorset band, The Gravity Drive. The track is called Shooting Star, and it's a really beautiful song. Check out their work on Bandcamp. There are links in the podcast notes. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll speak to you soon.
What's cool in Liverpool, you'll see. Scintillating cities and stunning countryside. Strap in and enjoy the ride. Light on with Hazel as your guide. Light on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Light on with Hazel as your guide. Light on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Light on with Hazel as your guide. Light on, strap in, enjoy the ride. Light on with Hazel as your guide. Light on.
If you could know the future, would you feel the same? If you had all the answers, would you question it again? My love is like an ocean, sea change from day to day. For a heart to be reopened, you gotta get out of your way. And all that I am, all that we are, and all that you want, and all that you ask, and all that it takes, and all that it scars, I'd follow you anywhere. You're like a shooting star. You're like a shooting star. If you could start all over, would you be here now? Riding on this supernova, we'll make it through somehow. My love is like morning, chasing dark away. I'm still searching for that feeling, then losing it again. And all that I am, all that we are, and all that you want, and all that you ask, and all that it takes, and all that it scars, I'd follow